Paul Gaudin has been in the healthcare industry for 24 years, and he's been advisor to the Health Education Authority, has sat on a number of committees in Whitehall where he really pioneered and pushed through developing more simple and impactful health and lifestyle models to encourage behaviour change. And for the last 6 years, he's travelled across the world working with a major reinsurer, setting up the infrastructure to achieve what is now the world's most widely used disease risk production app. And I know Paul's done lots of other things which I'm sure will come out of the conversation. So we're really thrilled to have you here, Paul. Paul has also been, as you know, Tom, working one-to-one with some of the fellows, and I know that's something you're keen to follow up on, so we can have a conversation about that. So we've got until 6, and then what I'm going to do is just bear with me. I'm going to pass the presenter role to Paul, and then he's got some slides that, obviously, because there's only one person on the call, you can take it how, if there's questions that come up, and we can have a bit more of a conversation. So over to you, Paul.
Great, thanks very much, Catherine. So Tom and everybody else, I'm focusing on distribution for the SME today, and the experiences that I've had across the globe, both good and bad, of the different channels and the different challenges that are faced both by SMEs as well as large organisations. So as we go through this, I'll stop at the end of each slide, Tom, and please feel free to ask any questions you may have.
Cool, will do.
So the rules for successful distribution are, of course, know your market. It sounds an obvious statement. A lot of entrepreneurs go at it like the clappers to get their idea into some sort of means of minimal viable product, get it out there, and struggle to get traction because, particularly in medtech innovation, people always want some sort of validation and data from it. But know your market is a fundamental one. Where do you fit in that market is, of course, vital because it's getting more and more crowded all the time. So understanding what part of that journey, what part of the solution you're providing a fit for or a solution for is really important. And then where are you on the obsolescence journey? Things are moving so quickly nowadays that you can be obsolescent within 6 months. And I'm seeing this a lot with wearable manufacturers. It takes 2 to 3 years to get your product to market, by which time it's then on the obsolescence journey, and you've got to constantly iterate and keep ahead of the competition. There's always somebody nipping at your heels and trimming margin or stealing margin from you or distribution. So where are you on that obsolescence journey is really important. And I use obsolescence as the negative word so that you concentrate on it because it's a fundamental part of success. So I've seen a lot of medtech innovations over the last year or so where it's really a race to the bottom in terms of both pricing as well as who's going to get the distribution first, and then finally who runs out of cash first. So really important part of understanding where you are. And then what problem are you solving? And that can be a moving target as well, which is a frustration. But that's quite natural also when you're innovating and you're providing a solution to a problem, you're actually fixing that problem. So the problem becomes more and more dealt with and more obsolete. So again, you either go for distribution of a wider market or you evolve your proposition within that customer base or that client in order to improve your opportunities to cross and upsell and evolution of your product. And then whose problem is it? So often we go, well, it's that person's problem or it's that department's problem. But actually, if you follow the problem through, it can be somebody else completely disconnected from a structure point of view or an infrastructure point of view you just don't see. And it's really worth understanding that. And that comes from really good questioning of your prospect, sitting down and being consultative and asking the right questions to get to the bottom of whose problem is it. And it can be lots of people's problem, but understanding who's got the biggest part, whose problem is that you're solving, who's getting the biggest benefit out of it is really important. And then often do they know they have the problem, particularly when you're at the coalface, in particular under the stresses of the NHS as the marketplace at the moment. people are so up against it that they don't really understand necessarily the problems that they have. They see what they think are the problems, but they may be underlying other problems that are causing what they're seeing. So it's important to know that they've got this particular problem, and that helps with consulting and getting under the skin of what they're doing in their particular job role or department. And then obviously, have they got a budget? Budget cycles are fairly open in the NHS, but if you go into other marketplaces, a budget cycle, you can really look at most organisations. If they work on a budgetary cycle of January to December, you will have, or an annual P&L a cycle of January to December, you will see them looking to develop budgets from around about the end of August through to the end of October. And that's a pretty fierce time. You've got to get to those people well in advance of that, well in advance of the holiday period, in order to sow the seed and understand that they may consider you for that budget cycle. So if you miss that budget cycle, you're often into an 18-month sales cycle. And of course, that's very painful. So right now, you're coming to the end of that luxury period up to the end of June, early July, at which point people shut down for the summer and start again in early September. So you really need to be focusing on distribution and prospecting right now. And then, are you speaking to the right person? Well, of course, there may be multiple people, as I've discussed, who might be the right people to be speaking to. So it's really a case of research and asking the right questions. Tom, have you got any questions from that first page?
No, that all makes lots of sense.
Okay. So then we move on to researching a client. Now, how well do you know your prospect or client? And I often look them up and just get a sense of who they are. And you can get a sense of whether or not they're career climbers, ladder climbers, whether they're 2 years in each role, whether or not they're at the beginning of that 2-year period or 3-year cycle. Are they single? Are they family people? What's going on in their lives that's important to understand? Are they people that are in the public face? Are they published on YouTube? Really get a sense of who these people are, because it really helps you to pick up on things that they're interested in, both from a social perspective that's useful to open conversations and get to know people better and develop a relationship, but also to understand where they are on their journey, their career journey, because you can help them along that way by giving them an innovation that may help them stand out in the crowd or to achieve a particular KPI they may have. Yeah. How long have they been in the role is a really important part of that. Often I see, and many people experience this, you see somebody you think is the right person, and of course they've got the right role and they're saying all the right things, and then you discover that they're 6 months from the end of their contract, or they're looking to move on, and you just get to the point of the sale and you suddenly find they're not there anymore. And that is a huge waste of time and resource and risk for every business. So very important you understand where they are in that cycle. I'm not suggesting for one moment you ask them, are they about to leave? But you can get some sense of their career process and profile from LinkedIn. What is their style and modus operandi? Are they focused on growth, cost management, process improvement, M&A, interim? If they're a marketeer, they'll often have been brought in to grow the business, and typically most large businesses go in 4-year cycles. So you will then see somebody who's grown something, and then that will be followed closely by somebody who's come in to do the hatchet job, trim costs and improve the margin again, and then the next cycle starts again. And it's important to know where they are, where the business is in that cycle, but also to know who this person is. Are they a decision maker and an influencer? Often people will say that they're the right people, but they may not be. So it's important to do as much research as you can on that. And then understand the decision making process. Anybody that I've ever spoken to in business who's buying things is very happy to simply say, give you a straightforward answer when you say, how do you buy this? And they will tell you very clearly what the decision-making process is. And I'm coaching a lot of startup entrepreneurs that it's okay to ask for the order. It's okay to ask these direct questions. You wouldn't be a serious business person unless you're in that room and you're asking the right questions. That's what makes the world go around, is orders, money, and supply chain. And then when do they set budgets? Well, we've covered decisions. We know in the NHS, of course, there's various budget levels which allow certain decisions to be made at a personal, local, department, or so forth level, with or without going to tender. So again, it's important to understand that. Organizations published strategies for the period, and are they on target? So again, research the client, understand what they're doing, what their mission is, and where you fit in that mission. And then again, if you can help to accelerate a gap in their strategy or a delay in their strategy, then you'll be seen as a very supportive and easy acquisition, easy purchase to bring on board. Any questions on that, Tom?
Nope, it makes sense as well.
Okay. And then we move on to differentiation. Know the value of your benefit statement. Now, sounds a rather bland statement, but it's actually really important to understand that any benefit that you say your product or proposition gives has some form of validation. Now, of course, when you're doing that from day one, you haven't got any data. You've got to go out and get it. But again, clients are quite accommodating with SMEs and startups to allow them to, a bit more rope, if you like, or free rein to get that data. So that interaction, that often requires a pilot, and again, pilots can be expensive, and it's often important to get the client to contribute towards the pilot. But knowing the value of those benefit statements is really, really important, because it allows you to differentiate your proposition. And the first person to have that data on that benefit is going to accelerate their business in front of anybody else, because it gives you a 3 to 6 or even 12-month advantage on having that data. It gives you that benefit statement lead. Very important. It also allows you to create an emotional connections with your client's brand and objectives, because you get to know really what those benefits deliver for them. So you can also, another way of doing this, and it works to some degree or less or more with some organizations, is to actually brand your presentation in their format. Now, don't go overboard on that, because they get very picky if you misuse their logo, whatever else, but just introduce things and images and various color schemes that are familiar to them, and you'll find that that will help them to understand and connect with what you're trying to say. It puts into context your proposition, your solution or service into where their business is and what it does. Measuring the impacts we've touched on, and then be consultative where possible. One of the most important things is not to forget that the early stages of any business, it's very painful, but you do have to go through a consultative process in order to understand in as much detail your customer and their problems and the way their structure works and the way that your proposition delivers value. And therefore, that needs some form of consultative approach. And that's really a lot of sleeves rolled up, a lot of time sat with the client or in their environment, working with their teams to understand as accurately as possible how you're going to price your proposition and what's absolutely intrinsic to what you're doing for them in order to get the order. Once you've got that, however, that's then replicable. You can take it out to other clients and so forth and develop your marketplace. So it is a lot of investment right up front, but it's absolutely worth it, because otherwise you will simply be skimming the surface. You won't really be understanding the value that you're offering. Using volume or value rebates where possible to create loyalty and sharing risk. Now, this is really important, because often you will get clients saying, what's my discount, right up front? And if you can lock them into a volume or value rebate, in other words, if they achieve certain things, you give them a rebate, some money back off something. That means they first of all have to deliver, because most of them will never deliver on those rebates. But if they've got an incentive to do so, ironically, it often drives better behavior and drives them to engage with you, delivering that internally within their own business. It also means that if you want to do cross and upsell of an enhancement to your service, you can actually use that. You can use the loyalty or the sharing and risk or the rebate to add that in at a lower cost. So you can use extra development and enhanced services as part of that idea of value and loyalty and sharing in the risk with them. I would never advocate, though, that you do everything for free in these early stages. Large companies just don't understand how to properly engage and respect SMEs. So it's really important that that sharing of risk is proportionate. It's no good putting a business into insolvency because you've overdone the commitment to your client. They're not going to benefit from it, and nor are you. So they will understand that sort of argument as well. I've often had very frank discussions with clients where I say, the things that matter to me are my cash flow, so please can you pay me on the nose. Secondly, are that you actually do what you're going to do, what you're promising to do. And thirdly, that I have regular connection with you, regular relationship with you, so that I can steer around any issues, deal with any issues, enhance the proposition, and really drive the value into your business. So again, very direct conversations. And do they know they have the problem? Again, time and time again, that's why I've reiterated it. Do they know they have the problem? Have they got the budget? And are you speaking to the right person? Any questions there, Tom?
Nope. It's all, I'm making notes.
Okay, that's good. And supply chain management. Now, this usually applies to a production of something that is a stock item. However, supply chain management, I think, has a very fundamental role in any business. So you might not be stocking an item if it's a software product, but it's still the same methodology is important. So we start in this area on how easy is doing business with you. And so often SMEs forget that doing business with you is actually a vital part of a large organization engaging with a smaller organization. Smaller organizations are obviously more willing to give great customer service and very personal customer service, and that's only scalable to a certain level, and then you have to automate everything. And in automating everything, you actually introduce better procedures, tighter procedures, and you drive better profit as well because you're more efficient. Now, all of this is probably part of the DNA of your business. It needs to start from the moment you communicate with your client or your prospect, right the way through to the order process, the contractual process, the way you behave with all of this, the educational and promotional material that goes back into supporting the development of your products or service within their organization. And then beyond that, when you're coming back and doing client visits and relationship management meetings, is what are you coming back with? Are you coming back with some really useful data, or just to have a cup of tea? It's really important that everything that you do is right the way through the organization, from the person that picks up the phone to answer a complaint problem, to the way that they can lodge a complaint on your website or lodge an issue on your website. Chatbots are fantastic for SMEs to scale in that sort of fashion. So again, doing business right the way through the entire structure of the organization. Think about, is it easy? Am I making it as easy as possible? We're all being challenged by the likes of Amazon, who are doing the most amazing job of making business easy, and that's why they're being so successful. So we do have to be very cognizant of following those processes to do as good a job as possible. Now, supply chain management that's again about understanding both the cost of your product to your client, because nobody really wants to hold stock anymore. So it's again about managing that as a just-in-time process. You want customers to hold your stock, of course. You want to sell as much as possible. They will be resisting that where they can, but they can only resist that to a particular level unless they have management information. Now, the more management information you give them, the more they can fine-tune that stock management, which allows you to do the same to manage your cash flow, but it also manages, if you're managing manufacturing organizations who supply you, again, what you're doing there is ensuring that you've got the very best and optimal supply chain. And that really does drive value for everybody, and it comes back to great data and management information and processes. And it will allow you, again, with any of your suppliers, to be much more dynamic in the way that you price, because you can give them information on the way that things are working. And that, I've used that to great effect in many different businesses, from the New York Bagel business through to furniture design and manufacturing, through to software, international software. So a very important part of everything that you do. Invoicing and payment. Now, again, coming back to cash flow management and what you ask for your customers for. I've been in situations where retailers have taken the money for my service on the nose, on the transaction, and have extended their credit terms to 120 days. And that's quite painful when they suddenly do it. And they often do this close to the end of a quarter or the end of a reporting cycle. And they do that to ensure that they have as much cash reserves in their bank account, and they do that to increase shareholder value. Now, you can very easily be caught up in that. So it's important in your service contracts and sales contracts that you actually have penalties for that, and be quite draconian about them. People respect them. It's not a bad thing to have in your contracts, sales contracts. So do put them in, and it allows you at least to charge what your bank is charging you for any extra overdraft facility and cash management, and at least you can recoup that. They don't always give it up easily, but it does give you a lever to pull. And their procurement teams will be aware of this and will be pushing back or supplying capital and payments back to the suppliers that have these types of clauses in. It's always negotiation, always negotiable, and it's usually one of those things you have to negotiate quite hard about, but really worth doing. The stock utilization, the benefits, and all of the management information, absolutely vital, as I mentioned earlier. The problem-solving element of this, how good are you at solving problems? What's your process? I've always been very customer-focused and was guilty in the early years of really overdoing the customer service piece. And this is really about expectation management. So in the service level agreement that you build in with your service or your product to your customers, you can manage that. So if you say we will respond to a telephone call within 48 working hours or 2 days or whatever it might be, then provided that's accepted by the client, then that's in the contract, that's your service level. Now, if you can beat that, then of course you're always beating that service level. And of course, it's probably to your benefit to be able to respond as quickly as possible. But there is a cost to this as well. And it's not always your fault as well. It's often poor education, poor adaptation, poor usage of your product that's led to the problem. So you can really cause a lot of work for yourselves if you don't manage that well. It's great to develop a really strong FAQ section on your websites. You can have really good voice recognition software to be able to answer calls automatically and take people through a triage process to support them efficiently, ultimately with a call center operative at the end of it. So all of these things are really key parts of enabling you to deliver very good customer service, get great management information from it, against which you can proudly report on your quarterly meetings. We've managed to deliver in excess of our SLAs, and it's a very important part of ongoing customer relationship management. Education. I think any of you, and I'm sure most of you will have experienced this already, realize that the amount of education you need to do is overwhelmingly disproportionate to the value that you get back from it on the face of it. However, if you make that slick and you put videos up on your websites and you drive people to it and you reward them for actually watching those videos and learning about your products, then you can begin to manage that to some extent. But lack of education in a constantly changing workforce, particularly where you've got temporary staff in place and locums, you've got to constantly keep ahead of that process. It's not a one-off process. So never ever underprice for that part of it. It's a vitally important part of getting your products or service to the patient, to the customer, to the client. So education, it's a big part that's easily forgotten. Any questions there, Tom?
No, it's interesting. There's a lot of stuff in here that I recognise from us. You know, it's walking that line between over servicing the customer, certainly in the early days, bespoking experience for them, and then how do you scale that out is a really interesting challenge, and one that we're grappling with at the moment.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know that, and part of the usefulness of speaking to people who've been through it before is that it's okay. You need to know, you need to understand what's okay and what's a first for you. There are very firsts for you. So if you can get a reference point that's acceptable in your industry, in your sector, and the best you can in that margin, then you can manage cost. But so often you really don't have a reference point, either because you've never been in business before, you've never sector before, or you're just trying too hard, and it's just something that's quite a natural part of wanting to be successful. It does cost a lot more than often is necessary. Okay, and then we move on to types of distribution channel. Now, these are all pretty obvious. I've got experience which invariably is both good and bad in each of these channels. So if we just start with direct to market, business to business, as it might be in your case, you've really got to employ your own sales force or do it yourself. Now, there's a long burn rate and education rate for doing that. If you're recruiting, trying to recruit good people who've got a great sales track record, know your industry, know your channel and your sector, have great connections and so forth, and then to train them in your proposition can be an 18-month burn rate. And in some cases that can be longer than that. Now that's an expensive person both to recruit and to manage. So direct to market is in itself gives you control, or much greater control. However, it can be very, very expensive. And one should never underestimate how long it takes to fill a pipeline and then start to close business. Yeah. It's rarely below 6 months, and it's typically 6 to 18 months before you start to see a return on that, just from a sales perspective, which it then runs out to a 3-year cycle before you start to get a proper return on that cost.
Yeah. So, and this is what we're doing at the moment, Paul, which is, you know, our only real route to market is B2B.
Yeah.
This is definitely something we're grappling with currently.
Yeah. And it can be painful. You'll be great at it because it's your business and it's you and everything else. But once you start to scale out beyond you, how do you do that to best effect? You take on one salesperson, you either get it right or wrong, and then you take another one, and before you know it, you've got to have a sales manager because you can't be there all the time, and so forth. There's some massive amounts of infrastructure and growing pains that one goes through as you start to grow your businesses. And I think anybody that's survived beyond the 3 years in this process, you know, deserves the greatest respect, because it's at that point where you start to begin to feel the next pinch points, the next pain points as you grow. Other channels, other ways of doing this are working with value-added resellers. Now, these are organizations who are already selling a product that's proximate to yours, and by bringing yours into theirs, they are adding value both to your proposition, but most significantly for them, for their point of view, to their proposition. So they add value. They then can, it's a cross and upsell model to their own existing customers, and that can be a highly efficient and relatively low cost route to market to scale. What you lose is some of the proximity to the customer, because you tend not to be in front of the customer. They are not your customers, so there's a trade-off there. You can negotiate on the data that comes out of this, and I would always recommend never signing a contract for more than 12 months. If they're really good, you might give 3 years with a 12-month break clause, but it does mean that you lose some control and some intrinsic balance sheet value because you're not growing your own database. But it can help you to get information and cash flow and knowledge and to develop your product. So not a bad route to market. Resellers on their own are cooler. It's more expensive because you're not adding value to them. They're not adding value to you, and it's really just reselling. And it's not the most successful. Brokers, again, typically take your proposition and will broker it as an advisor into certain markets, an employee benefits broker, a broker who's, well, I see a lot in the insurance industry, of course. So broking is not a bad way, but it's more of an advised sale, and you tend to have to walk the walk and be alongside them during those final sales, because they will not be an expert in your field necessarily. Then we move on to distributors. Distributors tend to use technology, and they tend to stock. So one great advantage of a distributor is often they will take your stock from you and pay you for that stock, and then they will move it on. That requires a higher margin to them, so there's a cost to you to do that, but it's a very successful international model, and but it does take a while to fill the pipeline, to get them educated, to get the sales teams working with the product. So never underestimate the time it may take and the amount of effort. Agents are very much arm's length. They're just people that will just take your product and make a sale, and you pay them either a commission or they will take a margin on top of it. They tend to be independent, so you may have one or two in your portfolio mix of sales distribution channels who are just great people who just know everybody and want to take 2 to 5% of any sale on a recurring revenue model, maybe, which is great if they know the right person. There's very little risk to you. You haven't got any overhead, and if they're correctly motivated, they can be highly efficient and effective, particularly in the early stages of your business. Introducers, that is simply somebody who picks up the phone for you, makes a phone call to somebody that you've been trying to get hold of, because they have that relationship. Very, very powerful. Doesn't need to be an ongoing revenue stream. They will typically take a slice, an introducer's fee, or you can give them a flat fee for just doing it. But very useful people to have in your armory of advisors and distributors, distribution channel partners. Advisors, even more remote, if you like, people who are just out there talking about things. They might be academic, they may be organizations that go in and advise companies on streamlining or supply chain management, or encouraging them to develop and grow their businesses. And you can be one of the supply propositions, one of the organizations and products they take to that client. So again, advisors can be anything from a financial institute, or accountants, lawyers, consultancy practices, McKinsey's and Bain's. If you network with them, they will use your service and be aware of it and introduce it into them. Yeah, you've got the online pay-per-click, which is, of course, much more a newer way of earning revenue. It's proven, it's expensive, but you certainly know when you've got a direct line to your customer who may be using this. It's much more pertinent to the direct-to-consumer market, of course, but it's a tried and tested model, and if you can afford to do it, it may well be right for particular products or services that you have. And I love partnerships. Partnerships, overwhelming in today's marketplace, are one of those powerful ways of leveraging what you're doing and getting to market. Now, one of the big cautions I have is that nearly every large organization I've ever tried to partner with has messed up the relationship, in that we don't fall out, but it's very difficult for large organizations to develop partnership cultures. And there are a whole range of reasons for that happening. So partnerships need to be very carefully entered into, but once you've got it right, and you've got to have the analogy of the Earth and a satellite. It's that sort of scale. You've got to be able to orbit them, drive value, demonstrate value, and extract value, and do that in spite of the organization. But by partnering with them, you can often get into other organizations where you'd really have struggled. And by partnering, you get the scale of that organization behind you, but you will still need to be the entrepreneur, the innovator, and try not to get crushed by the large organization as you engage with it. But very powerful. Buying groups are becoming stronger and stronger, and that's really about efficiencies. They take quite a big margin, but it can be a great way of getting your product in, but you can often get diluted. The message can get diluted because they have a whole catalogue of different services and products. So I don't expect a lot of business through it, but it's a good part of your distribution and sales armory. Tom, any questions on the types of distribution side?
I've got lots of questions on the detail, which probably aren't appropriate now. But we've tried the partner route several times, and I can see the power of them. And as you say, it's often hard to get aligned incentives with a big business. Very hard. So it'd be great to dig into the detail of that at some point. I'm not sure now's the time, but
no, happy to do that with yourself or anybody. We can take that particular area and focus in more depth on it. So I've got a lot of experience both currently as well as historically.
That'd be really helpful. And I guess things like the agent model, as we start to look at internationalization, that feels like a really sensible route. It's low risk, people that know the local market and are incentivized to run with it. As I look at those, that jumps out at me as a way of starting to deal with that problem. Absolutely, it does. Yeah, internationalization really is a partnership and a licensing model, and it's a very powerful thing to do. But never underestimate the sheer scale of the opportunity in front of you and how much effort it takes to go international. It's an easy thing to take an order. Once you've got an order, you've then got to go and support it and service it, and it can really drain a lot of resource and time from you. So if you go international, lots of organizations say, I've just got this call from China, or I've got this opportunity in the States, and it seems so appealing and compelling at that moment in time. But 6 to 12 months down the track, you see a business that's in complete disharmony and disarray because it's stretched itself too thin too quickly. Yeah. And it's something to be well aware of. Yeah. Okay, then we move on to contract process. Now, deal closing process, I like, if I possibly can, I always state this up front to a client, we have a transaction process, and they will invariably have their own transaction process. But if you can create alignment in that, then you will be following a process that you're entirely familiar with. And most importantly, often I've seen, and I've been guilty of this myself in the past, where you get very excited about having great meetings with somebody, and then you discover that they haven't mentioned it to anybody else in the organization. And you go on and on and on with them down a long journey of relationship, and it's all going very well. Then you come to the point where you need to ask them for the contract or the order, and it suddenly goes quiet. And it's because they really haven't engaged their internal stakeholders at all. And you may find that they've got completely different ideas and really would never incline to work with you in the first place, because either they don't understand what you do or they've got a different agenda. So
following a really strong, solid deal-making process is very, very important. I always start with a memorandum of understanding, because if you don't have an understanding of what you're trying to achieve, and if that's not signed off by the senior decision maker, then you may as well not bother starting. It's a very easy document to draw up. I've got templates and they're very, very easily available out there. If you don't have that, I really would suggest don't even start. And if the client is uncomfortable signing that, then again, quite frankly, why should you invest your valuable hard-earned money in doing something like that, which is not really really going to give you a return? So don't back off asking for an MOU. Moving from that quickly, and you can drive people down a timeline here to a letter of intent, an LOI. That hardens it up again. So during the MOU phase, which can be anything from a week to 3 months, I wouldn't stretch it any longer than that, is really about go and investigate, get some data, polish things up, present to various people internally there within their organization, invite them to come and see you, so forth. Then we move on to the LOI, and that's hardening things up. And then finally, the contract, the actual contract. You move into the negotiation around the contract. And people often think that the first contract is the thing they have to sign, but every single clause in that contract is negotiable. Now, many organizations have tried to tell you they're not, but you really should, and it's a responsibility for any business owner to actually protect their company, their shareholders, and their capital, their employees, and everything else they're responsible for, by making sure that contract is not going to put their business at risk. So it's very important for you to feel comfortable about pushing on any of those points and to negotiate either certainly take the summary over the web, over an email, go through it with your lawyers, your legal advisors, highlight any issues, and then go back and face-to-face negotiate. And you will get what you want. And some contract inclusions that people often forget is that it's very important to make sure you put the client on a performance contract. It's not just about you performing. So often it actually gets in the way of doing business. And it's because they've just, large organizations, departments, divisions, people get in the way. Whereas if they know they have signed up to a contract that means this person has to do this, then it gives you a lever to pull that's very important. It's also an important thing to ask your client that certain people have this on their KPIs for the following year. If somebody's got this on their KPI to senior management level, they will make it happen. Otherwise, they don't get their bonus. So it's very important to follow that through in the way that you structure the contract. Service level agreements, again, we touched on that earlier. Service level agreements, again, don't overdo it. Decide what's right for you, what you can physically deliver. And then the rest will be understanding how you can compromise or build workarounds for it. But don't always accept what the customer is asking for, because they will always ask for the very best and the very 24/7, 365. I've got certain call center support services, etc. They may be not something that you just can't deliver. And then finally, currency fluctuations. I have come horribly unstuck with this before. One tiny little clause that just says this contract is subject to a currency fluctuation of no more than plus or minus 5%, for example, after which you can renegotiate the contract or the terms or the payments. When we see what's happening in our world at the moment, the political issues, the war issues, the economic issues, there is no certainty about what's going to happen in any marketplace around our currency exchange rates and how you might behave with and trade with other currencies around the world. So very, very important to get advice from your bank, from your lawyers, from your accountants to get that figure right. Any questions there, Tom?
No, some stuff again I recognise that's very useful to hear from someone else.
Okay. And then moving swiftly on to systems, CRM, client or customer relationship management systems. Salesforce is one of the most most well-known ones. It's very, very good. Often integrates with your accounting system if you have one. Pipedrive and Fresh Sales are both very good. There are many, many, many of them now. So, but it's important to choose one that fits with your business and your stage of business, because they can evolve with you. So you can change over time. But it delivers such amazing insights into what you're doing, and you should really govern and drive your business around it, because unless you manage your relationship with prospects and customers, then you're just going to be filling the bath up with the plug out. Stock management, absolutely vital. So many people get left with stock inadvertently or by mistake, either because they didn't keep an eye on it, it's in somebody else's warehouse, it's becoming obsolete and so forth. Don't be left with stock, and always keep a fundamental eye on it. It will kill your cash flow if you're not careful, and it will certainly impact on your profitability. And then get all the data and statistics from your web views and websites, your apps, and really interrogate those. If you don't have expertise in-house, there's both systems as well as advisors who can help you with that. Really important to understand how a campaign or a Twitter comment or a feed or something you've done actually impacts on your business and the people listening and looking and reading it, because that allows you to then iterate and do that better next time and more of it. It also feeds innovation and development. Regular meetings with your clients to understand their problems, to getting needs analysis and needs statements and problem statements. Really important part of becoming both consultative, partnering with them, and being seen to be the people that are just reliable and great people to rely on for the future information and developments, enhancements, and so forth. So, you know, the cheapest and best customers are typically the top 20% of the people of your clients. The majority of your revenue tends to exist in that group, and they are the easiest ones to do cross and upsell to. And don't always focus on developing everything in-house. Often you can do a really cool deal and do it quickly by partnering with somebody else to resell their product into your customer base and give you a window of opportunity whilst you're going to develop something that you wish to develop in-house. It gives you time, margin, and it shows your client that you're beginning to add value as well to them. After year 1 or 2, it develops a proper pipeline of innovation and development. So that brings us to an end, just in time for a few final questions or comments, but I hope it's been helpful.
Yeah, really helpful for me. And there's loads there. I've been furiously writing notes as you've been talking, because it's such a huge topic, isn't it? But lots of stuff that resonates, lots of pitfalls as well that I can see us falling into, and we need to find ways to avoid. But overall, that's been super helpful.
Good, and please feel free to come. You know, anybody that listens to this, I'm available to answer questions on email about certain topics, and we can book calls to follow up on a particular problem or ratio. If you're building a sales plan and a business and growth plan, it's really important to understand how much money to put into that in order to fund that development program. And it's not just about the cost of an individual or a particular channel. I remember my expenses just for me traveling around the world, would top £20,000 a month sometimes. And that for a small business is a lot of money. So, that's got to come out of your margin, and that's just for one person. If you start to scale up, it becomes a very big overhead just to keep one person on the road delivering sales. So choose carefully, and I'm happy to advise at any stage on some of the figures and ratios you need to consider.
Thanks, Paul. And what I'll do is I'll circulate the slides and the recording to everybody, and we can maybe pick up the question that we'd asked prior to this webinar, which was sort of what is your one question. We can think about the next webinar and how people would like to use that. But I just had a quick question. You've obviously had a lot of experience in the NHS, but also and health systems, but also in private sector. And I'm just interested, before we go, some of the things you're finding currently within the NHS and anything in terms of insights that speak to your experience of it, because it's a challenging environment for most of our fellows. It would be just interesting to just hear your thoughts in terms of your experience to date and where maybe you think some of the biggest challenges are and perhaps some of the biggest opportunities.
Yeah, I think that one of the great resources I've become aware of recently for this is within digitalhealth.london, within some of the insights they've got to actually put a process in place for getting to the NHS. I don't see anything that's particularly easier to follow. There's no sudden freeing up of a particular opportunity or channel to market to make it easier. The one thing I have found with our care rooms concept most recently is that where you're applying a solution to a pressure point, there's that much more or much less resistance to getting to see the right people. But as we all know, it takes an enormous amount of effort and resource to sell one contract. And then just because you've sold one, it slightly helps the next one. But you have to keep on selling it. Sometimes even with the same organization, you've got to keep rolling. And it makes it a very expensive and long-winded process. What I am seeing, and I'm trying to open up other vertical marketplaces for medtech entrepreneurs and service providers, is there is a growing desire by the reinsurance and insurance industry to get involved in medtech innovations and health tech, because it's very proximate to insurance claims and risk management. But the massive acceleration in diabetes risk and dementia is ultimately going to have a massive impact on their balance sheets and their profit and loss. And therefore, anything they can start to develop to get in front of that problem and be proactive around it and do better risk or disease management should be something that's very sweet and in their sights. So there is finally a coming together of innovation and reinsurers, insurers. One still needs to be aware of the Earth and the satellite model, the risks of being run over and crushed by them. But there is a lot of energy, there's a lot of funding and a lot of opportunity in those marketplaces. And the same in corporates and employee benefit zones as well as international. So it's really important, I think, to get a mix of both revenue and distribution to support your NHS efforts, and then to use the resources that you have available to you internally where possible to just help to get in and connect.
Great. Thank you very much, Paul. Tom, did you have anything before we go?
No, I mean, only a request really, which is, Paul, I'd love to have a follow-up if possible, either on the phone or in person. I've got a bunch of questions which are specific to Doctor.
Yeah.
I think your input would be so valuable if you've time.
Yes, absolutely. So part of the work I'm doing for the NIA allows that to happen. So why don't we just connect on email and we'll get a time in the diary? I mean, are you in London? I can't remember.
Yeah, we're Waterloo.
Yeah, so I'm in and out of London 2 or 3 times a week. So we'll be able to find a time over the next 2 or 3 weeks to do that.
Cool, that'd be brilliant.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Sorry, Tom. I can send an email and I'll include some details on Doctor for you, Paul, and I'll introduce you both via email.
Great. Awesome.
Okay. Well, we're at 6 o'clock. Thank you, Tom, for joining. It's a shame other people weren't here live, but I'm sure people will get actually a lot out of it from listening to it. So thank you very much for joining. And Paul, it's a fantastic start to our learning program webinar series anyway. So it would be great to get feedback on your experience, and we can pick up offline once we finish today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.